Hey, everybody. He's Walter White. She's Skylar White. I'm Jesse Pinkman. He very well could be Gustavo Fring, but that ain't it either. We ain't Breaking Bad. We ain't making meth, but we are making Vikings Report through a TED. Chris, how you doing this evening, my friend?
DEA took all your money, your lab, but you know the business, and I know the chemistry.
Doing all right, and we might not be making meth, but there have probably been some accusations about whether or not we're actually on it during this show. But that's okay because the Vikings are 5-0, and hopefully rolling into a big game this weekend and keeping that streak going. So, yeah, I'm not on meth at the moment.
This is not meth.
Ruby is in the background somewhere. She is actually doing some real work. So sadly, she cannot come on and say hi, but we would be remiss if we did not say hi to Ruby. So hi, Ruby. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for setting everything up again, like you always do, and doing all the editing and stuff to make us look not as dumb as we are in real life. Drewster,
yeah,
how are you doing this evening?
Fantastic. This is like a playoff game coming up, man.
It really is. Is this arguably the biggest meeting in the long and storied rivalry between the Detroit Lions and the Minnesota Vikings?
I think it is.
It's got to be pretty close.
It's got to be right up there if it isn't it?
Yeah, I feel like it is. We've sat through a lot of the Lions-Vikings games, well, all three of us. So
the all-time record between these two teams is so one-sided that if the Lions swept the Vikings every year for the next 19 seasons, they would still be under 500 all-time against Minnesota.
Yeah.
It's been that bad. Like the 90s, I think, the Vikings won like 18 out of 20 games or something just crazy like that. It's been a one-sided show between these two teams for the most part.
They play twice a year, and from 1968 to 1974, beginning of 74, the Vikings won 13 straight. 13 straight. That's home and away each year. That's a lot. That's dominance right there.
Heroics of Wayne Fonts and Eric Hipple aside, this has been a very one-sided affair.
The great Eric Hipple.
As one-sided as the record is between these two teams, they have put on some very good games over the years that the Vikings just always seem to come out on top. The memorable NFL Films game, I was too young to watch the game. It was the Thanksgiving Day game at Old Tiger Stadium in 1969. Snow and mud. It was just kind of the epitome of the Purple People Eaters. It was I think that Jim Marshall fumble recovery. He pitched it to Alan Page, who goes in for the touchdown. Greg Landry, who just recently passed away. Rest in peace, Greg Landry. Thoughts and prayers to the Landry family. He was a great quarterback for the Lions. Never had a really good team around him, but he was a very good quarterback. I mean, just a lot of memories go back in this rivalry. And, yeah, this is a very huge game for a lot of implications.
Was it 68 or 69 the year that the Vikings and the Lions played each other and they both showed up wearing their white uniforms?
64.
And the Vikings had to change their Was that 64? Yeah, the Vikings changed it like the second quarter so that you could actually tell people apart and whatnot. So don't see that happen very often anymore.
No, not at all. And, you say we just lost Greg Landry. Shout out for Greg Landry and his family. But that guy had to deal with the brunt of the 13-game losing streak. He was the quarterback. Yeah. The Vikings tore him apart, but he always got back up. Greg Landry.
Yep. And that was the height of the Purple People Eaters with Gary Larson and Page and Eller and Marshall in their prime. Yeah. So anyways, normally we pick a movie, but we picked Breaking Bad. And Drew, I think you had a clip you wanted to pick. And I'll explain why we chose Breaking Bad, but Drew, you had a clip I think you wanted to use right away.
To get out in front of the big Lions playoff matchup this week, even though it's not a playoff game, it is. I found this footage. My buddy sent it to me. It works for the Lions. It's footage of offensive coordinator of the Lions, Ben Johnson, preparing his game plan against the Vikings defense and Brian Flores. Let's take a look. There you have it, Ted.
Nice.
Why do we choose Breaking Bad? We normally pick movies. I threw this out to the group. Hey, why not Breaking Bad? Because of, I feel the transformation the Vikings are making, not necessarily into bad people. But if you're a fan of the show, and it's one of my favorite shows of all time,
Number
if
one.
not my favorite show, it's right up there for me. If you've not seen the show, Walter White, the main character, is just this mild-mannered high school science teacher who is diagnosed with basically terminal cancer. And to help pay for his bills, he enlists the aid of a former student of his who is a small-time meth dealer, and they become the meth kings of the Southwest. And he transforms from this mild-mannered meth teacher into this evil drug lord, basically. he goes from Walter White to Heisenberg.
I think it was a science teacher, Ted. I don't think the meth was a class.
Yeah.
Chemistry class. I mean, that counts.
Chemistry. That's what it was. He was a chemistry.
Oh, chemistry. Yeah, I'm sorry, chemistry. And so it's just, I feel it's this transformation. And you mentioned, Drew, several times over the last few years about this gloom that was hanging over the Minnesota Vikings franchise with the previous regime. And Chris, you've used this phrase writing with the Daily Norseman. You got to shuck out the jive before you bring in the love. And I feel both of those terms now apply. The doom is gone, and we've shucked out the jive, and we've brought in this love, and this transformation has occurred. And I think this is just kind of a perfect use of Breaking Bad, maybe kind of in reverse to an extent, but it's a great show. So we're going to throw some clips of Breaking Bad throughout that as we go. So before we get going, as always, go ahead and check out Purple Pain Forums. That's purplepainforums.com. Our home away from home on the internet. Great community of Vikings fans. Great topics of discussion over there. Your old school message board format without all the garbage you can see on social media, on X, on some of the Vikings fan pages, on Facebook or whatever. There's none of the insults, none of the personal crap that goes on. It's just great discussion, great people, great community, purplepainforums.com. And if you want to go to a great site to gather all your Minnesota Vikings news in one spot, go to the Daily Norseman, the SB Nation home for Minnesota Vikings news and information and opinion. DailyNorseman.com, run by our very own I am the one who mocks Christopher Gates. Been running that website since 2006. He let me write there for about 10 years. DailyNorseman.com. Walter White may have been the meth king of the Southwest. I am currently the nobody cares about fantasy team king. All right. Like we said, we got Vikings news. We're going to talk a little bit about the NFC North. We got our big preview, and we got the milestone to talk about at the very end of the show. But before we do that, Drewster, what time is it?
I'm cooler than you are. So why don't you take care of those kiddies coming into town this week and light this candle?
He's right. It's time to make that meth and light this candle.
He surely is. Let's go ahead and light this candle.
Stay out of my territory.
All right, I'm cooler than you are. Why don't you fix your little problems and light this candle?
He's right. Let's light this candle. He surely is. Light the candle.
Yes. Resume the countdown.
Yes. All right. There we go. Man, it was a busy off week and bye week for the Vikings. What I kind of thought would be kind of a rest and recuperate week turned out to be anything but for the Vikings. They come back from England, and Blake Cashman is out. It looks like he's going to be out for the Lions game, probably the Rams game too. Turns out he has turf toe. They need to get a hold of John Goodman from, what's the movie? Dude.
Oh, The Big Lebowski?
The Big Lebowski. I can get you toe, dude. I can get you toe by 3 o'clock. He's got turf toe, so he's gonna miss that game. Cruzier Hill is probably going to be his replacement, it looks like. Aaron Jones is kind of uncertain. It looks like he's going to return to practice. As we record right now on a Wednesday, he's going to return to practice on Thursday, see how it goes. But his status is very much up in the air. So the Minnesota Vikings traded for old friend Cam Akers, who was with the Vikings last year, ruptured his Achilles in the Atlanta game. They got Akers and a conditional 7th-round pick. Chris, what are your thoughts on that trade? I mean, last week you said you were okay with Jones and Chandler, but Chandler and
Gaskin, not so much.
Myles Gaskin was not going to cut it for you.
No, and it's kind of funny because this is the exact same trade they made with the Rams last year to get Akers, with Akers and the conditional seventh for the conditional sixth. So they made the same deal 2 years in a row. They didn't meet the conditions last year. I think Akers needed to get like 500 rushing yards or something like that in order for the pick swap to take place, and that didn't happen. But yeah, he's a capable back. I mean, he's been doing a solid job with Houston this year. He was the only guy who scored when the Vikings beat the crap out of Houston a few weeks back. He had their only touchdown. He was getting the bulk of the carries with Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce out. And yeah, he's shown that he's more than capable. He can catch the ball out of the backfield, and he's not going to be expected to step in. He's going to rotate with either Ty Chandler or Chandler and Aaron Jones, depending on how healthy Jones's hamstring is. It's important to note that it's a hamstring and not a hip, like we all thought it was initially, because hamstring injuries are tricky. We saw that last year with Justin Jefferson after he missed 5 games with his hamstring issue. So, the Vikings have been pretty good about making sure people are fully healed up before they throw him back out on the field. So I'm sure we're going to see that with Aaron Jones, whether he's ready or not. Yeah, so I like the trade. We'll see if the pick swap actually happens. We won't know until after the season, obviously. But yeah, I think it's a solid deal for this team.
Drew, you get a guy that's familiar with the offense. He's not Myles Gaskin, as Chris said. And Chris brings up a good point. It is not, in fact, the hip, as we were initially told, or the Vikings initially thought it's the hamstring. Is this enough? If it is a hamstring and Jones, and you brought up the Aaron Jones history issues, you thought it might, if he got hurt, it might be multiple weeks. Is Chandler and Cam Akers enough to get you through a month without Aaron Jones, or are the Vikings going to need to go get somebody else?
I don't think they do. I like the Cam Akers deal because he is familiar with the offense, the system. He's familiar with the locker room. He knows a bunch of guys on this team. When you make a trade for a player, a lot of it has to do with the culture of who you're bringing in. Why I tried to explain to somebody today that the Lions aren't bringing Hassan Reddick in. He doesn't fit the culture. Matt Crosby fits the culture of Detroit perfectly. That's why I think they're going to go after him. My point being the culture of who you bring in. He's going to be a good locker room guy. He's familiar with the offense. He can catch the ball in the backfield. He's versatile. He never gets tackled for loss. That's one thing I like about Cam Akers. He seems to always fall forward. And let's face it, if a disaster happens Sunday, he could play. He could play Sunday. So
yeah,
not having to go get a guy you can't play for 2 weeks because you got to learn everything. I understand the trade, and I like the trade. I like Cam Akers. I don't think he's just there for the paycheck. I think he's a good football player.
Yeah, I do too. I like it a lot. I'm going to disagree with you that if this is a multi-week injury for Jones, again, just monitor this. Like I said a minute ago, the Vikings, we record on a Wednesday. The Vikings said Jones is going to practice on Thursday, and we're going to kind of go from there. If Jones is going to be out for like 3 weeks or a month, I think they might have to go look somewhere else. I don't know, but we'll see. But I do like the trade. It's for peanuts, basically, for a guy that I thought played well when he played last year in front of a line that I don't think is nearly as good last year as it is this year. Go ahead, Drew.
Vikings, after this week, will have played a really tough schedule.
Yeah.
The next 4 or 5 weeks is a schedule that they can win without Aaron Jones if they had to, as far as I'm concerned. The teams that
That's a
are
very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point.
And the thing about Aaron Jones is he's not one of those players you bring back when he's 95% or 98%. He is a lingering re-injure guy. Some guys are just like that. Some guys you could bring back at 70%. Curtis Martin, remember him? The running back of the Jets and the Patriots. He played at 70% his whole career. He's a guy that can play injured. Some guys could just play injured. Aaron Jones is not one of those guys. You need him at full capacity. The Packers kept bringing him back last year and re-injuring himself. If you remember that, he'd be out 3 weeks, bring back 1, and then he'd be out another 3 weeks because he wasn't fully healed. You got to let that guy fully heal. But look at the schedule. I mean, the Vikings can win games.
Yeah, that's true. Just a situation monitor, and we'll see what happens as we lead up to Sunday. Sadly, future Hall of Famer defensive lineman Jalen Redmond was waived in a much-anticipated trade for Dexter Lawrence.
Yeah, when does Lawrence play? Did he play this week for us?
I'm kidding. It was not for Dexter Lawrence.
Oh, Lawrence is on the team, though, right?
See, this is why I don't like. No, he's not. No, he's still with the New York Football Giants. People are idiots, man. Just a lot of people are just stupid.
You actually this stupid? I mean, what the hell is wrong with you? I'm really asking.
And they just don't need to be on social media. They don't. They just don't. But it was to fill up a roster spot. My thought was that it was to activate TJ Hawkinson, which has not officially been done yet as of the recording of this show. But I think that's going to happen. Kevin O'Connell has said, hey, look, we have to get TJ Hawkinson ramped up to be able to play football. He's rehabbed and he looks good, but we just have to be careful with this. With the Cam Akers trade, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe Cam Akers now is that 53rd spot, correct?
He is, because, yeah, they had an open spot when they dropped Redmond, and they did bring Redmond back to the practice squad, but they did have a spot open, and now that Akers is on the team, he is occupying that space on the roster.
So if they do activate Hawkinson, they would have to cut somebody else now.
They would.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Drew.
I do not think that Hawkinson will be playing Sunday. I wish he would. I hope he will. That's my take on it. He could be trying to scare the Lions into thinking that he's not going to play.
I could go the other way on that, thinking he's trying to make them think that he's not going to play when they have every intention of playing him. But
sure.
But I can see your point on that as well. Chris, you're the tiebreaker here. Is he playing or not?
I would love to see him out there. I know he probably wants to be out there. But, we mentioned this briefly last week. The Vikings have a quick turnaround after this one. They play on Sunday, and then they got to go out and play the Rams on Thursday night. Asking him to play 2 games in 5 days after the injury might be pushing it a little bit. This is something we are not going to know until the final injury reports come out on Friday. But, what the hell with it? Yeah, he's going to be out there. He's going to play. We'll put him out there and see what happens.
Okay, all right. Another guy that was activated off of IR was guard Dalton Reisner. His practice window was opened up on Monday. A lot of speculation is that he might be Ed Ingram's replacement on the offensive line. It's not that Ed Ingram is bad at run blocking. It's that he's obscenely horrid at pass blocking. His PFF numbers for pass blocking currently is 29.4. Last year, Reisner was not great at run blocking. He was 50. Ingram's was 62. Their numbers overall were pretty close. Ingram's was 52.7 and Reisner was 57.1. Do you think the Vikings are going to activate Reisner and then replace Ingram with him, Chris, or are they going to just activate him as a depth guy?
I think he's going to end up being a backup. I don't know if the potential disruption to continuity and whatnot is going to be enough to get them to pull Ingram out of the lineup at this point. If he would have been able to come back during the bye week and maybe work out some things during the bye, that would have been one thing. But I think he's going to be back as a depth piece. Like we said when they brought him back, they didn't exactly give him a contract that screams automatic starter on the offensive line or anything like that. So he's probably going to be the backup. And if something happens to either Ingram or Blake Brandel or even Garrett Bradbury, because he could play a little bit of center too in a pinch if they need him, he might be the guy that comes off the bench to be that replacement.
We'll see what happens. The Vikings are not a fraudulent 5-0 team. I would argue the Bears are a very fraudulent 4-2 team. The Packers, questionable. Lions are probably pretty good. Intangibles, Drew.
You know what I got for my intangibles is prep time. If Kevin O'Connell has been good at anything, it's when he gets extra time to prepare for a football team. He seems to do really well. You remember his first game he ever coached, 23-7. They pretty much owned that Packers game. And he was ready. He had all 3 phases covered. He's never lost coming out of a bye. And he's had extra time because we got our bye week a different week than Detroit got. They had to play last week. I think the prep time that Kevin O'Connell has gave him not only a chance to formulate and watch tape on Detroit and formulate a really good game plan, but also correct those things he did in London that he didn't like. Forcing the ball to JJ, throwing it deep. I don't think when he looks back on that, he realizes that was the wrong way to go in that game. That and the penalties the Lions give up, the 20 first downs allowed by penalty, I think that's a big intangible too. But it's KOC with his prep time. I think that's going to be a difference in this game.
Do you guys remember Super Bowl 53? Who played
I
in that
remember
game?
everything, Ted. I remember everything in my life except a few notes Ruby left on the fridge.
Who played in Super Bowl 53? Do you guys remember off the top of your head?
The Rams and the Patriots, I believe, was it not?
It was. It was. Do you know who the
Wow. Chris
defensive coordinator was for primary? I mean, Belichick is credited as the defensive guy, but who was the defensive coordinator and came up with the game plan for the New England Patriots in that game?
Jess Spagnuolo?
I am going to go way out on a limb and say Brian Flores.
It was. Do you know who the
Was it
starting
really?
quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams was that game?
Quarterback?
Quarterback.
Unless I miss my guess, that would be Jared Goff.
You know what kind of offense they ran in that game?
None, because they had 3 points.
There you go. And it was very similar to the offense that Detroit runs now. And I'm telling you, everybody talks about last year when Detroit ran a lot of points up on the Brian Flores defense. And it was towards the end of the year. I think it was 2 of the last 3 games the Vikings played when that defense had been run ragged and the offense couldn't stay on the field. It was 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. And the Vikings defense was hurt. They didn't have the guys they needed. Brian Flores has the guys he needs. Flores said, go get me Ben Ginkle, go get me Cashman, go get me these type of guys. And he did. Brian Flores has the guys he needs and the guys he wants to run his defense. And when he does, and he can bring pressure on the quarterback, he can shut down Jared Goff. He did it in the frickin' Super Bowl, man. I expect the Minnesota Vikings defense to have a pretty good day against the Detroit Lions. Because if you remember that Rams team, they had Todd Gurley. They had Robert Brooks, one of the wide receivers. That was Sean McVay, one of the most prolific offenses, I believe, in NFL history that year. I mean, they kind of rivaled the greatest show on turf, the old St. Louis Rams offense from back in the day. And he completely stymied them the whole game. If Flores can bring the pressure, and I believe he can, you pressure Jared Goff, he gets rattled, he gets off his mark, he gets out of the pocket. He's going to make some sketchy throws. You saw that in that Tampa Bay game that he lost. I'm telling you, man. Telling you, that's my intangible. Flores versus Goff with the defense he wants to run.
I'm going to go with the fact that by the time the Minnesota Vikings take the field on Sunday, the crowd at US Bank Stadium will not have seen their team in that venue in damn near a month. They played the Houston Texans in week 3. That was September the 22nd. This game will take place on October the 20th. So, yeah, almost a full month since the Vikings have taken the field at US Bank Stadium. In the meantime, they went to Green Bay and won. They went to London and beat the Jets. They had the bye week, and now they're going to be come back. This crowd is going to be insane. They want to see some football. They want to see this team continue to roll. This is starting to feel like one of those seasons where the Vikings have a shot at doing something special. And Detroit, like Ted pointed out earlier, Detroit hasn't beaten anyone good. The one good team they played this year, they lost to. They have not seen anything quite like this Minnesota defense. I know Ted talked about, last year the Lions scored a lot of points against the Vikings defense, and the secondary was like rookies and practice squad players by the time they got to play Detroit. And they were throwing it all over the field, both in Minnesota and in Detroit. And another X factor, I know Ted's touched on a couple times. If TJ Hawkinson is out there, you think that dude doesn't want to win this football game? You think he doesn't want to put Kirby Joseph into the freaking shadow realm somewhere?
The shadow realm.
That's exactly what's going to happen. They're going to get Hawkinson out there on a run, and he's going to plant Kirby Joseph about 3 feet under the dirt. So there really isn't a home field advantage. Well, there is a couple, but there are a few home field advantages quite like US Bank Stadium, especially when this crowd gets going and good things start happening for Minnesota. So I will give the Vikings the intangibles check mark.
All right.
My summary, the offseason, Kevin O'Connell, he talked about bully the bully. It's time to bully the bully. 2 games that bugged that guy was the Packers coming in here and beating our ass at home. And we saw that when they went to Lambeau. The first half of that game, O'Connell was going off because he was angry. The other game that pissed him off was Detroit. They've won 3 straight, including winning in Minnesota 30-24 last year. And then the end of the season, they were kind of putting it in our face. And O'Connell has stuck that in his craw. So the bully, that's what he talks about now. He's had this game in mind. You ask, well, if the Lions are first in points scored, all this and passing and, rushing, they lead all these statistics. How do we beat them? Well, you go back and you look at Tampa Bay. Detroit's only loss. And let's talk about that for about a minute. The Lions had 463 yards, 139 on the ground. The Lions ran 83 offensive plays, 36 more than Tampa Bay. 36 in one game. Think of that, 83 offensive plays. They had 247 more offensive yards than Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay won the game. How did they do it? They held Detroit 1 for 7 in the red zone, and Dan Campbell, at the end of the second quarter, he could have kicked a field goal to bring them within. The field goal would have won at the end of the game, but at the end of the second quarter, he was penalized because he had his special teams unit out there and he had his offense. They took a penalty. The penalty ran out the clock, and he couldn't get any points at the end of the first half. Like I said, that guy's the biggest problem to their team. He does it every week. He's going to do it this week. Tampa Bay, if you go back and look at that game, they could have had 4 interceptions on Goff and no touchdowns. That's how Tampa Bay won that game, because they were out statistic in every category. They won because of the red zone, and they won the turnover battle by 1. That's how you got to go back and look at that game. That's exactly how the Vikings are going to win this game if they're going to win. You got to be strict in the red zone. You got to win the turnover battle. In that game against Tampa Bay, he had a 4th and goal at the 6-yard line. Didn't kick a field goal, even though it was 20-16. 4th and goal, went for it, turned it over on downs. He got it back and got it down to the 2-yard line. Lost it on downs. That's the reason they don't have any 50-yard field goals. He makes a lot of mental mistakes, Dan Campbell, and I expect him to do another, because when he gets pressed, starts feeling pressure, he does stupid things.
He does.
Vikings take this game. I think they're up 31-24, something like that.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, the Lions have put up a bunch of points the last couple weeks, but, Seattle's defense isn't very good. Dallas, like we said, they checked out before halftime. They couldn't get anything going on defense. The Minnesota Vikings ain't the Seattle Seahawks, and they ain't the Dallas Cowboys on the defensive side of the ball. There are not going to be dudes just running open. The Lions aren't putting up 40-something points this week. That's for damn sure. Yeah, I think the Lions are gonna come back down to earth a little bit when this defense gets their hands on them. I mean, I don't expect any sort of a blowout in either direction, but I think the Vikings are going to continue this undefeated start to their season.
Last year, in weeks 16 and 18, the Minnesota Vikings were pretty much out of it. They were 7 and 8, and then 7 and 9. They lost 4 of their last 5. They lost 30-24 and 30-20. Nick Mullins was your quarterback at that point, and he threw in those 3 games a combined 700 yards. Now, he also threw like 22 interceptions, but Nick Mullins threw for 700 yards combined in those 2 games. He damn near beat them in Detroit. He had that interception in the goal line, whatever. This year, the Detroit Lions, let's just kind of recap their season so far. Week 1, the Los Angeles Rams. The 1-win Los Angeles Rams took them to overtime in their house in week 1. They lost to Tampa, as Drew talked about in week 2, at home. That was a home game. Lost to Tampa Bay at home. Went to Arizona. I believe a 2-win Arizona team that just got pantsed by the Green Bay Packers. Won that game by a scintillating score of 20-13. Now, everybody seems to have forgotten those first 3 weeks, because they beat the Seahawks 42-29, and then they beat the Dallas Quitters 47-9 against a Dallas defense that was missing 6, I believe, starters or key players. Right. I agree with you 100%. I said this about O'Connell and the Packers game, and Sam Darnold about the Jets game. One of the reasons I picked Breaking Bad, because the Vikings, I think, have kind of gone into FU mode. I think they have said, we have shucked out the jive, and we are going to bring in the love. We're going to bring in the people in this locker room, and we're going to go scorched earth on the rest of this league, because we are sick and tired of being sick and tired. I know the fans are. I know I am. And I'm buying it. You listen to O'Connell's locker room speeches at the end of the game, and you could tell what he's saying to the team when the cameras are on is kind of like red meat to the fans. But when the cameras are off and it's just them, he's telling them stuff like, we're going to kick the shit out of these guys. That's just the vibe I get from this team this year. I really, truly do. Knock on wood, but barring like some catastrophic injuries like the Lions have with Aiden Hutchinson, this team is a wagon this year, man. An absolute wagon. They just are. And nobody wants to believe me yet, but you're gonna. At some point, you're going to believe me. But this team is a freaking wagon this year. Rant over. For us three idiots and for Ruby, that does it for episode 144. Don't forget to like and subscribe and do all that stuff you're supposed to do. No preview show next week. We got the live watch party Thursday night for the Rams game, but we return to our regular schedule after that. So, adios, amigos, and we will see you on the flip side.
Time to make the meth.
Heisenberg!
What about Heisenberg?